Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this special edition of the Scott Stedman podcast. Because believe it or not, and I couldn't hardly believe it, this is our 300th episode, which is astounding. Because when I first started this journey, actually way back in the day before it became the Scott Stedman podcast, back when it was Theology and Backgammon, it was me and Ryan kind of started us off as just two camp guys in seminary just try to figure this stuff out and just have conversations that this has evolved into a 300 episode um podcast with more on the way. And part of the help of making this a 300th episode is my co-host, Micah Current. Micah, how are you doing today?
Did good, man. I can't believe it's 300 episodes. I mean, most TV shows don't even make it to 300. And I was trying to figure out when I joined you, like what episode we were on at that point.
We were on the episode. Ooh, I would have to pull that up, but I think we weren't even at episode 100 when you joined, because me and Ryan did it when we were theology and backgammon, and then when he moved, it was just me. And when you're doing a podcast and you're the only person, it's kind of hard because you're just basically at this point you're just vlogging at this point, like just doing a
Sure.
video or audio log of your thoughts and ideas and hope people are interested. But then once you came on the show, it kind of became, at least for me, I feel like it became more interesting because at least I felt like we could like bounce back and forth. And if what I'm saying you agree with, it's like, okay, good. I'm not the only one that feels like I'm going insane with whatever the topic's going. But then even if there's disagreement, at least we can kind of really work out those disagreements with dignity and grace. So yeah, I mean, it's been yeah, but I'm just gonna have to double check that real quick because you're right. Like, when did you go on? I think you might
I
have
think it
been
was
episode.
2021, maybe is when I started. If
Maybe
we're in
let's. I'm gonna.
26 now,
Yeah,
um, maybe 22. I'm not completely sure.
I'm not sure, but we'll look at that. So we'll go ahead and I'll try to find that number and I'll make that later in the show. But one of the interesting things I find so fascinating is is the how much has changed. Because when I started the Scott Simon podcast, it was mostly entertainment, psychology, theology, Christian ministry. That was kind of like the wheelhouse of the things that I was interested in. And, for some of us, for you and me, when we first started this journey, um, we talked a lot about a lot of things in Christian ministry. Sometimes it was stuff with the Church of God. Sometimes I'd have conversations with people. I know when the United Methodist Church had their split, I got to have Caleb Henry on my show, and we got to talk a little bit about kind of how that how all that stuff that happened and how that went. And overall, it was a good conversation because we're kind of seeing a lot of changes that have happened within the church world. And now, with our 300th episode, going back to when I began, even when you began, there's so much that has changed within church culture, Christianity culture, just in our world. So I want to kind of really talk about like kind of the things we were talking about before versus kind of the things we're talking about now. So Michael, what's something that you've kind of noticed just in the 300 episodes we've been doing together, like kind of what's been going on and how has things changed?
Well, um, Well, before I do that, I was kind of preparing for this because you mentioned yesterday when we were talking about what should we record about, and you're like, I want to get the 300th episode recorded, and I was kind of thinking through, episodes, things like that. So I Googled the podcast, right? And so with this wonderful thing called AI that we're talking about like daily now, the AI overview, and I don't know, Scott, if you've looked at this,
No.
but the Scott Stedman podcast. Um, When you Google what the AI overview says, the Scott Stedman podcast, formerly referred to as The Scott Stedman Show, is an ongoing audio series where Scott Stedman, host, explores the intersections of religion, psychiatry, psychology, and entertainment. The show frequently features his co host, Micah, diving into pastoral leadership, church culture, and modern societal issues. And there's subheadings as Safe Faith and Ministry, Unpacking Church Politics, The Struggles of Ministry Work, and Transitioning Out of Pastoral Roles, Mental Health and Society, Examining Psychology, Psychiatry, and Everyday Mental Wellness through the Spiritual Lens, and then finally interviews, occasional guest episodes features authors, speakers, and public figures. So I was like, wow, man, we've covered a lot over the years. And it's actually really cool when you sit back and think about it. I mean, the ups and downs of ministry, the transitions of ministry, having children grow up, having children, like your children move with you and, start a new ministry at a new church and kind of the unknown. But you got back to Ohio, the struggles of my wife and I having children, and we're finally blessed to have a child. Some health concerns. Obviously, I've been vocal about my cancer journey over the last year or so. Um, just wow, some of the things that we've covered. And then to circle back about your question, what's changed and what's been very um, hard to believe, or you know, what's changed a ton in the church over the last
Hmm.
5 6 years. It's amazing that during the pandemic, I walked away from full time pastoral ministry and went into more of a consulting role. And went in, and my role was really mainly just to help churches that didn't have the technology or the means to do things like live streaming, promote themselves on social media, create websites, market themselves so that their existence was actually known in their communities. And so I've been able to help, and it's been such a blessing when I think about it, help and foster relationships over the last 5 6 years, you included in that conversation, but just market the church in a way that can be done affordably and um, you know, it's not shocking to know that you could do some of these things relatively cheap or free for that matter. And so, um, one of the things that has really shocked me, as even as we're speaking, since 2020, since the pandemic, since the church went remote, since the church has learned to do things in an online setting, it's amazing to me how much stuff has changed in a tech lens, through a tech lens. Like, some of the softwares that we're using aren't, they're outdated, they're obsolete. There's new softwares, there's updated softwares, there's, the conversation of AI, and we've had that conversation. Like, you know, write me a sermon manuscript, throw my, slides in ProPresenter without even having to touch the computer. Create chord charts without having to even download them physically from CCLI, print them, and put them in folders or binders and give them to my worship team. I can send them all electronically just through prompts. Um, I mean, there's so many things that have changed in such a short amount of time, and I feel like I'm just rambling at this point. But
Hmm.
is that kind of what you were looking for?
Yeah, well, yeah, and I just checked. Your first episode with me was episode 112
Wow,
because I was looking at older ones, and there's some where it's just me. There's some where I was having special guests on, and I've talked about different topics. But the one where you kind of became more of a mainstay would have been episode 112.
I've been on 188 episodes.
I know, 188 episodes.
That's
So,
wild. You either are really desperate or you haven't figured a way to get rid of me yet.
well, yeah, but
Wow, that helps my
I know
confidence.
that was very. That sounded bad. I didn't mean it that way. But no, you have to think about a lot of the topics that I was talking about, I mean, I was talking about, there's one episode where I talked with three different people, kind of talking about kind of the church and sex and kind of the idea of, as we got older, kind of how did we understand, how did the idea of the teaching of sex in the church, how has that shaped our lives? And now that we're older, as being taught that as kids, and then now we're older, like how that has changed, or what things do we keep the same, what things have changed, and everything. And it's fascinating because you have that, and those were episodes like 108 through 111, I think. And then probably within the last couple of years, there's been like this really big thing about the whole purity culture movement, how toxic it was. Even Joshua Harris, who kind of wrote that book, I Kissed Dating Goodbye, has come out and said, I condemn that book because the stuff I've written in there, I just don't believe anymore. And you see how many people have shared their stories, both men and women, on how that had really like affected them or shaped them, or sometimes that kind of helped led to certain abuses that happened within the church. So you kind of see like from there, hey, we talked about this, and then just kind of like now that's a big thing where it's been talked about. Even just we talk about things like, what's the best practices? How is it important for churches to have a child protection policy? And what are some things that are important that we have to have within our protection policies to really keep children and youth safe? And then now there's been more accounts of cases where pastors have acted inappropriate with students, and there's jail time, and we're seeing it almost seems like every day I'm seeing a news article of a pastor in this church or a teacher at a Christian school or anything else acting inappropriately with a minor. And so you see all that stuff happening. Um, when you think about church ministry, you almost kind of get to the one part where it seems like things are getting worse. Because before it's like now we're seeing all this stuff come up within churches. We're seeing more stuff coming out with pastors who are abusing their power. With me doing my doctoral study and my research on church transitions, you're just seeing, oh man, look at how all these pastors, and especially when we look at things like Willow Creek and Mars Hill and even Hillsong, and even just recently Bethel Church, some of these big churches, which I know we talked about our mega churches dying, but we're now kind of seeing like there's a lot of problems, a lot of leadership structure problems within these mega churches that are causing a lot of issues and covering up a lot of like sinful things, and that's a concern. Um, However, on the plus side of things, the things I've been seeing changing is been seeing a lot more people kind of going back to basics. Um, I just recently read an article about multi-tracks and using multi-tracks in worship. And I know before it's like, hey, that's really good because it helps keep everyone on time, especially if you're in a smaller church and you don't have the benefit of having a full band. Like this can kind of help you with your worship service if you only have a few musicians or no musicians to kind of help lead worship in smaller settings. And now there's kind of this thing going, well, okay, who's actually leading worship? Is it the worship leader or is it the multi-track? And how do you, if you feel the spirit moving you in something, well, you're almost confined to a multi-track. So there's almost kind of like this shift about, okay, well, multi-tracks are great, we love them, but now we're kind of seeing there's an issue with it. We can't do a lot of this fluid movement. We can't really do more call responses because we're kind of regulated into a system. So we're almost kind of almost in a way, a dismantling of systems to kind of go back to authenticity. So we're kind of seeing that pendulum shift back in some ways within church life, which I think is going to be interesting to see the next couple of years how that turns out and what stuff we're going to be discussing in the future in regards to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've talked about it too, but like, are you considered Gen X or?
I'm in that
millennial
weird
and
Gen X millennial. Like I'm kind of the end of Gen X and the beginning of millennial. So I'm in a weird camp.
well, I'm seeing all this stuff about how Gen Z is just on fire for the church and they
Hmm.
just are doing really well. And it's just like me as a millennial, I mean, I'm grateful and I'm happy for them, but as a millennial, I almost feel slighted in a way
Oh,
because it's like, and that could be a podcast for another day, but it's just like we, I don't, honestly, there wouldn't be a Gen Z church without the millennials because the millennials are kind of the catalyst for making the way for that kind of stuff to happen because we were the ones fighting some of these boomers and Gen Xers that didn't want to change anything and wondering why their churches were going to die or did die as a
mm,
result. But yeah, it's I was going to bring up also the stuff that we did. We talked about like you had mentioned just a moment momentarily ago, but the Hillsong and the Mars Hill and Bethel and all these mega churches seeing their heyday, but they're hanging on and there's still things happening. Um, Bethel's still going and Hillsong is still going and churches like Gateway and some of them have managed to survive. Not saying all of them because Mars Hill didn't obviously, and then Driscoll actually went to is it Mark Driscoll, right?
yeah.
uh, Went to a church in Arizona out in Scottsdale, and he's been pastoring there for a while now. But um, it's kind of strange because it's almost like the Marcel thing never happened.
Hmm.
But not saying that they don't have their issues at the church he's currently at, but we can't we can't know because we're not there. So we're kind of waiting to hear or see if something does happen as a result of that, or maybe he truly has changed, and maybe he truly has had that reconciliation with himself, God, and others that he feels is necessary in order to keep on doing what he's doing, preaching the word every week. But it's pretty um, incredible to think that you know they say millennials have lived through so many different things, right? Like the internet, the birth of the internet, the birth of Wi-Fi, the pandemic, the the collapse of the economy in 2008, the recession, housing crisis, XYZ. And we've never really talked about it, but it's like the church is the church hurting as a result of that because maybe giving's down at your local church.
Hmm.
Well, if I can't afford my house payment, how am I going to afford any extra activities within the church, including giving? And that's not we've talked about tithing being a biblical thing, and we certainly believe that, and we've expressed that on the show. But maybe people are, they don't know that, they don't practice that. You know, it's it's amazing to see that in the short amount of time that I've been doing this, as we get ready to drop a 300th episode, that AI can tell me everything about your show in a paragraph.
Yeah. And
Um, Good.
and again, I love how he said like formerly known as the Scott Stedman Show. It's like we were never called the Scott Stedman Show. Like it's never been a thing. So AI,
Not saying like not saying that AI is correct about everything. I'm not here to preach that or jump on that train. I'm just here to say that it's pretty incredible that like I did not even mention my name in that search, and my name was on that search.
yeah. And
So
and I think it's fascinating because now I think, when we look towards the future of the podcast, I mean, the reality is and I've always appreciated, and I can't remember which professor told me this, but there's almost like a pendulum shift
yeah,
that goes back and forth when it comes to any aspect of church life. Like there's times where the church is going to have like these great highs where whether that's people are working together and volunteering, attendance is up, giving is up, you have good church leadership that's really making great impacts within the church life and the community that they serve. You see the pendulum shifts, and then you kind of have this season of want where maybe giving's down, maybe your attendance is down, serving is down. Like there's a lot of shifts that happen, and whether that's just church life or even with music, worship tracks, how that helps. And now it's like, well, let's go back to authenticity when it comes to worship. When it comes to, now we're seeing kind of like almost like a cleaning out of corruption within churches and getting pastors, not only pastors getting out of leadership that are abusing their position for power or for whatever the case may be, but then also we're kind of seeing the accountability that, the fact that some of your bigger churches, and I know we mentioned, like we've talked about the SBC and their scandals, how when a pastor was accused of acting inappropriate or committed a sin, then instead of the SBC saying, "Okay, you're out," they just move them to a different place, away
Mm.
out of the state, different community. So they're still serving, but they didn't really address the issue that was happening. So now that there's accountability, like, hey, you've been moving these pastors around who have a basically a closet filled with dead bodies, and you're not addressing that, or you're not taking addressing that at all. So it's fascinating to see the types of changes. It's also fascinating to see on a denominational level the amount of changes we have. Like, I mean, we talked about the split between the United Methodists and the Global Methodists, but then even we've talked about within the Church of God with the general director leaving and the hiring of an interim director, and we're still kind of waiting. Okay, when are we going to get another general director? What's the update on that? Like, there's not a lot of stuff happening. So there's a lot of pendulum swings that happen back and forth within society, which almost and that's just the religious part of it. If we wanted to go and really dive into psychology and the entertainment aspect, which, we haven't really been doing that much except for like when I do a film or thought occasionally, but like it's just fascinating just to see how things have shifted. Even when it seems like church life is dead or things are deteriorating in the midst of a pandemic, we get out of a pandemic and we have the Asbury revival and we see the Holy Spirit pour out. And it's just like, whoa, this is amazing. So there's always going to be shifts and changes within Christian culture and church culture. And it's exciting because you never really know what's going to come up, what new thing, what's going to be a fad, what's going to be a mainstay. And even sometimes the things that are a mainstay may be a mainstay for, especially within this culture, maybe 5, 10 years, and then it's no longer a thing anymore. And I don't know if you could call that a fad because it has some longevity to it, but the way our culture just continues to keep moving and as technology continues to keep advancing, how we do ministry always changes.
Yeah. And are we prepared for that?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I don't know where you want to go from here, but it's just like it's obvious that, even as we continue to talk and have conversations, it's like there's always something to talk about. We're nothing short of
Yeah.
ideas or topics that we want to talk about, but it's just like, you know, it's sad, but it's also eye opening that
Yeah. Well, I
you
think
open your phone every day and you see an article about a church that's in trouble because of some scandal.
Yeah. Well, I think that's kind of a big thing. Like, what's kind of the thing, I guess maybe to kind of wrap up this episode, like what's one thing you're hoping that you want to talk more of on the podcast because of the way we're seeing the changes moving in a good direction that's exciting for the church or something you might be excited about? And then what's one thing you really don't want to have to talk about again on this podcast because not because it's negative, but because we're seeing more of that stuff being addressed and we're hoping that that stuff is on the getting on the down low and we don't have to really address it anymore because it's not a thing. So I mean, I know I just pitched that to you, so I'll just go first. I think the one thing that I'm excited about sharing is just kind of the more authenticity of church and how things are being more authentic. And especially, as things have become more so much systematic and programmed to make church life easier, to make things better, to make things seem more polished and clean and presentable on a Sunday morning, or how we correspond to things, or even through social media, how we communicate certain things on our social media channels, how it's very systematically and how we do things. Now that we're seeing more of this shift into being authentic, how do we navigate that? And what are some new exciting things that we're seeing to kind of help make things less, even though they may still be systematic in some ways, how they are also authentic as well? So that's one thing I'm really excited to see happen, in the next in the next 100 episodes. Uh, you know what? It's the one thing I could really care less about talking about is all the different church scandals. Like, and I know that's very vague, and I'm sure you're probably like, yeah, I don't want to talk about that either. But but I'm hoping that the reason why we're not talking about it is because we're seeing so much stuff of good reporting about it, and even church leaders and even congregations basically saying, we need to nip this in the bud. So we are going to, make sure that that pastor who's or whatever person's acting bad in the church, that they are removed from the situation, that there's a time of healing, and that through this process, we're really seeing growth within the churches, growing from basically the ashes of a bad situation or a bad culture within their church. So that's one thing I really hope I don't have to talk about another, like, oh, someone did this or this Christian artist did this, because there's more stuff happening where that stuff's not being investigated, and you can't really hide it anymore, because with social media, with reporting, with accountability, more stronger accountability systems, like, we won't have to talk about that. And hopefully we can talk about that when there's people who are struggling with something, that they feel open enough to be able to say, hey, I have a problem and I need help. And the churches, instead of saying, oh, you're a sinner, and then kind of led them to hold on to the struggles they had, and then until it blows up, that they can say, okay, here's what we can do to really help you or navigate you, pray for you, and encourage you to seek the help you need, but still continue to do ministry, because you are still doing good ministry despite the struggles you're having.
Yeah. I mean, you kind of stole the one I was going to pick. I mean, I could care. I would rather not talk about another church scandal. I know they're going to happen. I know they're inevitable. Um, but it's hard because it's hard to see your colleagues and friends in ministry go through some of that, especially if they're on staff at these churches that we uh, do episodes on. Not saying that we have, but you know, some of them hit close to home because we've lived through some of that. And if I didn't say that, I'd probably say, I'm not saying we've done a ton of this, but I could care less if we're talking about a Christian artist suing their record label or suing somebody for for just a money grab, but we're talking about stuff or expecting you to feel sorry for them just so that they can get more money and be more famous and more popular. It's just not cool with me. I mean, I dislike it, and not saying that we've done a ton of those episodes. Like I said before, we did that one about um, not Mercy Me, but they were involved in the lawsuit.
Yeah.
Who was the the
Newsboys.
Newsboys? Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that whole scandal. I mean, it wasn't just a lawsuit. It was a lawsuit and a scandal all in one. And I was just like, this is just a hot mess. Why do we have to? Why are we? Not you, Scott, but just why does the Christian world have to read about another scandal? Um, Something that I'm excited about. I mean, I'm really excited about you know seeing where the church is in 5 and 10 years. Talking through, you know, we've had a conversation about AI. We've had a conversation about technology in the church. We've had a conversation about how we can make workflows easier through work in the church, whether it's social media, um, sermon series, automated stuff through your worship service to make things easier. Um, Focusing on the right things. We did a podcast on generational differences, but like the number one reason, this is a couple of weeks ago we did this episode as of the date of this recording, but 70% of kids between the ages of 5 and 17 quit going to church because they didn't feel loved when they went to church. So they have no relationship with the church or religion whatsoever. I want to change that.
Yeah.
Through the podcast, through the message, through the power of the Holy Spirit and everything like that. And be able to tell people about the tools in which they can do so.
Yeah. And yeah, I think all that's great and that's really wonderful. And yeah, like, but even bringing up the whole Newsboys thing, the fact that we have people who are basically saying, okay, they're not basically going where I feel like before, like maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago, if something like this happened, we'd be like, oh man, like something's really wrong. Like the Newsboys got a really bad rap. And we would be like, oh man, here's this beloved band. And oh man, we're glad that they're sticking up for what's right and they feel like they've been wrong. And we're just going to pray for them and stick up for what's right. And then, but now because of everything that's come out, even all the facts that have come out about the case and everything else, it's almost like we're sitting there and we're going, okay, this is definitely a money grab. And how's this furthering the kingdom? How's this making Christianity better? And I think that's kind of the mindset of a lot of people because, again, things have changed where if this would have happened 15, 20 years ago, it may have been a different conversation. Different opinion. We probably wouldn't have seen it as a money grab. We would think like, oh, it's someone did some defamation, and we're cheering you on because fight the good fight, And it's like, well, yeah, we're not saying that now because we have a lot more information to go off of where we may not have had it 10, 15 years ago. But I think the most important thing about this episode is the fact that you, our listeners, have listened to us, have stuck with us. You've agreed with us. You've disagreed with us. You've either you've commented publicly on our videos or you've shot emails to us. Like, thank you, because whether you agree with what me and Micah say, whether you disagree with what we make, whether we get a thumb up or a thumb down on a video, the fact that you're with us and you're hearing us and this is engaging you and hopefully this is making you think and maybe think about the things within your own ministry context, that's really the purpose of this podcast. So thank you so much for being a part of it. Thank you to all the sponsors who give money to this podcast to keep it running, to kind of pay all the maintenance fees that we do for this, and all the subscription fees. Like, thank you so much. We appreciate each and every one of you. So friends, that's going to be it for us. Thank you so much for listening to Scott Stedman podcast. And we'll be back on later with another episode. Take care. Thank you for listening to the Scott Stedman podcast. The Scott Stedman podcast is made possible by support from our listeners. We thank listeners like Patty and Scott, whose support goes to this podcast's continual growth and maintenance. If you want to support this podcast, you can do so in a number of ways. First, feel free to give us a 5-star rating if you enjoyed this episode and share it with your friends. If you'd like to financially support the Scott Stedman podcast, you can go to the website ko-fi.com/the Scott Stedman podcast. That website again is ko-fi.com/the Scott Stedman podcast. Thank you so much for listening.